The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So you only have a sound. So I'm going to hear you through that.
Yeah.
So if I hit this, is it going to feedback?
Let them change. They're changing the mixer.
Okay. I'm very confused.
Right now, it's using the laptop.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Oh, okay. So you can hear me through that.
it's interesting on the sound check.
But
Actually, that's positive. That's a good thing that she can hear through.
Yeah.
okay.
As soon as we switch the mixer over here, we'll test it on the phone there, and I believe we'll be okay.
Okay.
And you'll have an option to do both.
So if Victor speaks, will we hear him?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Just change that.
Hi, Susan. I'm
Nice to
Kira.
see you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
You too. Listen, I have tried to open on my phone the document you sent me that has kind of like the deliverables from the facilitated sessions, and I can't do it. So I'm wondering,
okay.
can you just tell me what
Yeah.
it is we need to come out of the facilitated sessions? But I mean, was there like a notes taker? And
Yeah, there will be a notes taker, and I think actually Kirsten is going to be in your group as the note taker. So she'll take care of that. So what you should do at the beginning of the session is just identify someone to report out at the end, who can be responsible for just summarizing the discussion in 5 minutes. I mean, the outputs are really, we mean this to get states to sort of drill down to what they, like the questions that they have about.
Yeah, I can show you a copy. I made 20 copies.
Okay, that should be enough.
Probably be enough.
Yeah, we're hoping about 15 people per group.
Breakout. Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, so you just want somebody who will be the designated, not the facilitator, but somebody from the group who's going to be the designated person to report out on at about 5 minutes.
Yeah, at the end.
At the end.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Kirsten can kind of, help if the discussion seems a little slow. She can kind of jump in and help you out.
I think I've got like 8 slides,
Okay.
which I think is enough to drive a lot of conversation.
Okay. That sounds good.
And
yeah, it doesn't have to be like, you talk for 20 minutes and then
I would
everybody
go
else.
slide by slide and just start the conversation and see
Yeah,
where it
that's
leads.
fine.
If we don't get through all 8 slides, so be it. And at the end, I even have an exercise that we could do if we ran out of stuff to talk about.
Okay,
We
so
still had
you're-
time. So
you're-
I think
you're
we're going to
very
be
prepared.
fine
Okay.
for an hour and a half. But
Yeah.
I didn't know whether or not you had a note taker already or you needed somebody. So that's great that Kristen's going to be in there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super.
Okay, thanks.
I'm trying to think of what your super fail-safe can be. If you just get the mics, room the webinar, just have an audience to take time for questions.
Yeah.
And then it'll be a one-way, but at least we know we can set it up so the mics will work.
Yeah. Hey, David. Good. How are you?
Oh, just sit anywhere, and then we'll be up here talking from our chairs.
We want the state folks to just sit like around this U table up here. I guess we can sort of shift around because there are 5 of you presenting, so maybe we can just, we'll shift you guys up here when it's time for the state panel. Yeah.
We're done. We're good. All good.
Not all good. Not all good.
Not all good? What is that?
Hello. Check. 1, 2, 3.
No, it's
Hello.
First,
Check.
computer on.
Check. Hello, hello.
Is there also, can I plug in a charger over here?
Yes.
Okay.
You have your power?
Yeah.
Are you looking for a cable?
We're looking, do you have a power here?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Make sure it's not here.
Yeah. Okay. I get it, powers.
One, two, three, four. 1, 2. Can you hear me, Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit low. Can you bring it up? Yes. How about that? You go.
Can we do it? I don't think so. I just,
How about that? Can you give me a number? One. Yeah, still a little bit.
just like figuring out the audio. Yeah, my stuff is for there. And the agendas are. Okay, I'll take them.
We try dialing in again?
Still a kind of low. Do you hear me much low? Yeah, I can hear. I can hear you on the. Almost good now. Yes. Check. 1, 2, check 2, 1, 2. Check 2. One. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes.
Okay. Did you start it? Oh, you can hear me.
Oh, you can step out.
I was like, you can hear me, but I couldn't hear anything.
No, we're
Okay.
Thanks.
Oh, it may probably be.
Check.
I can hear you a little low. Can you hear me?
Check two.
Can you hear me?
Okay. It's so super hot though.
I can hear him, but he can't hear me.
Oh, that's perfect. Bash.
I hear you.
He can hear you now.
Now I hear you too.
Yeah.
And I think you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Testing.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Everything is just super. I don't know. Look at my volumes. Look at my volumes. Check two. Super hot. I don't know. Yeah. It's still. I don't know. Okay, but here's check 1 2 2 2 2. Okay, damn. Check 2 2 2 2 2 2 2. Okay, check 2 2 2 2.
Check 1 2 3. Check 1 2 3. Check. Hello. Check 1 2 3. Hello. Check. Hello. Check 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. Check. Hello.
Test. Can you hear me?
One, 2, 3, 4. 1 2 3. 1 2 3.
Check 2 1 2 1 2 3. Check 2 1 2. Check 1 2 3. Check 2 1 2 2 2. Check 2 1 2 2.
Test. Can you hear me? I hear everything you guys are saying, but you still can't hear me.
Yeah.
Wait, those exact first problems last month.
1 2. Check 2 1 2 3. bring him up some. All right, tell him. Can you hear us now? Can you still hear us? It's talking to
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes. You're fine now. Sound great. Yes, we're good. You can.
All right.
She can dial in. Can you ask her if she can dial in for me, please? Well, you already in service, right? No, no, no.
Right. I heard it, Don.
Hi, everyone. If you could please take your seats, we're going to get started. So thank you, everyone, for joining the NARUC-NASEO Roundtable on enhancing microgrid deployment across the state. My name is Kira Zeidelman. I'm a senior manager in the Center for Partnerships and Innovation at NARUC. We're going to start off with some welcoming remarks from Dan Tan with the Office of Electricity at DOE. The Office of Electricity is supporting this work group, so we thank them for their support. Dan, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone attending this event, the inaugural event of the NARUC-NASEO Microgrid State Working Group. Many of you have attended the NASEO conference last week and NARUC Winter Policy Summit this week, and I appreciate you sticking around this afternoon and tomorrow morning session. This is very important roundtable discussion supported by NARUC and NASEO. I'd like to thank the roundtable organizer, Kiera Zierman and Danielle Burnett of NARUC, and Sam Kramer and Kirsten Verklaas of NASEO putting this event together. I'd also like to thank the National Lab participants for supporting this meeting. So I manage the Office of Electricity Microgrid R&D program, and my program is undertaking research, development, and enabling technology to support broad development, deployment of microgrids, ranging from remote microgrids to grid interactive singular microgrids to networked microgrids. These technologies we are supporting are aimed toward enhancing the resilience of nation's critical infrastructure, contributing to grid reliability restoration and recovery, and improving efficiencies and flexibility of the grid sector. Working with the states has been one of the key approaches of this program to accelerate broad development of microgrids along with its associated enabling technology. Our collaboration with states follow different pathways, with all of which are designed to meet the mutual interests of the collaborating states and the DOE. For an example, my program has been supporting National Labs in carrying out conceptual microgrid design for New Jersey transit grid for the city of Hoboken, New Jersey, and New Orleans. These designs are ready to be picked up by A&E firms for public-private partnership to advance into engineering design and build stage. Another example of the collaboration is with New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, on which DOE supported tools to conduct independent assessments of 13 microgrid feasibility studies produced from this incentive grant. My program has also worked with Alaska Energy Authority on a joint solicitation and making joint award to support the deployment of microgrid enabling technologies under Alaska's Emerging Energy Technology Fund program. Over the years, we have worked with states such as New York, Connecticut, California, and different capacity of providing expert resources to support development of their grant program and review of grant proposal and project. Committed not only to continue but strengthen our state and engagement efforts to accelerate broad development of microgrid in state. The NARUC-NASEO Microgrid State Working Group is evidence of this commitment. I expect this working group to serve as an effective forum for state energy offices and regulators to discuss state needs, barriers, and how to overcome barriers to broad development of resilient microgrids, as well as specific collaboration opportunities with the DOE. So hopefully we have conveyed different ways for federal-state collaboration on microgrid development and a big picture view of the state microgrid working group. I look forward to hear any impactful collaboration opportunities in the roundtable discussion and throughout the 2-year duration of the state working group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Can I ask you to turn your microphone off? Thank you. Hi, everyone. This is Danielle Sass-Burnett with NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation. We're very excited that today is here and we get the chance to work with all of you. First, I want to invite any of our state partners to please join us at the front table if you'd like. This is your working group, and we look forward to collaborating with you. We first, as NARUC, want to thank DOE, of course, for this partnership. DOE's been a tremendous partner to NARUC over many years, and we're really excited to expand into this particular work area and really accomplish something great together over the next couple of years. We also want to thank our partners and friends at NASEO. We are in a wonderful part of our relationship over time where we're really partnering on so many different areas, and it's been tremendous. We're very grateful to have that opportunity and to hopefully bring the benefits of those partners from a national level to the state level so that we can all accomplish more together. So welcome to our state members, both NARUC and NASEO members. You will hear more about the agenda today from Kira and Sam, who've really taken the lead on all of this, along with Kirsten. And I think you'll find that today's a really thoughtful agenda to make sure that you have a chance to learn some things, and also that you have a chance to listen, and we can listen to you as well. We're really encouraged and looking forward to hearing what would be of most benefit to you all over the next couple of years while we work together to ensure that we're really collectively and collaboratively helping to solve problems that you're facing in your own state. So we're quite encouraged to have the chance to do that with DOE's support. And today will be a very important part of the agenda setting for the state working group. On the NARUC side, I just want to share that this is one of 4 state working groups that we have underway right now. On the other side of that wall, in fact, there is one on performance-based regulation, and so please excuse me if you see me running back and forth, that's why. I will also be helping to facilitate over there, and then we'll be here too. For others that might be interested, in addition to microgrid, performance-based regulation, we also have a working group around electric vehicles, and one on grid interactive efficient building, which is also in partnership with NASEO. And so in all cases, we are collaborating and providing access to peers and to experts and trying to help answer questions that you all might have. Make sure that you get the information that you need to make really well-informed decisions in your day job. So I will close by handing it over to David Perry, and just thank you all again for being here.
Thanks, Danielle, and nice to see everybody. I'm David Terry, Executive Director of NASEO. I'll apologize for my cold in advance. A few of you got the fair warning not to shake my hand, but I will keep my distance while I'm here. It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces here, and I think echoing both Dan and Danielle's comments, I think finding the shared goals, mutual collaboration is what this is about. Our goal is to provide, obviously, our respected members value and value in your state in what you're trying to achieve in the microgrid area, examining often in the case recently it's been around resilience and other issues, but the amount of enthusiasm and interest that we see in this group and in this topic, particularly among the states, but also the private sector, I think speaks to the opportunity and the need. And where we continue to stay focused is, where do we add value for all of you in your work? And I think we're fortunate the relationship we have forged with Danielle and her team and Greg and others at NARUC, and certainly among the NARUC members, I think is incredibly important. It helps us do our job better, more efficiently. I think certainly to serve the members, also to make good use of funders and supporters such as Dan, who we greatly appreciate, the Office of Electricity, and their efforts to support this work as well. The other thing I would add, I know many of the NASEO members were in town last week for discussions, and so we're glad to have you here if you return, or if your colleagues were last week. We had some similar discussions around microgrid, but I think digging into some of the valuation issues and items that have been called out that Sam and Kara have teased up on the agenda with your input should make this well worthwhile. So just thank you again for being here, and thanks to Danielle. It's a fun partnership. We don't get to say that very often about it, but it is actually a joy to work with her and her team. Thank you.
Thank you. And we just want to remind everyone we do have remote participants with us via webinar. So thank you all for joining. They have said that it is a little bit hard to hear, so if we could get audio turned up to the webinar a little bit more, and just a reminder to any speakers, be sure to use a microphone. So our objectives for today, as we're included in the agenda, we want to try to share the landscape of microgrid deployment across members of our state working group, which we're very pleased to have such a diverse membership and so much interest from so many different states. To help provide you all as state energy offices or public utility commissions with some starting knowledge under 3 breakout group topics that we identified that were really of interest to a number of state members, and to try to enhance your understanding of the tools and resources that are currently available through DOE, the national labs, and others to assist states in advancing microgrid deployment. So our agenda for today, we have some introductions. Would like to hear a little bit from you all, why you're here and what you're hoping to get out of today's meeting. Then Sam and I will go through a summary of where we think states are on microgrids based on the individual calls that we conducted with our state members in December and January. Then we'll hear directly from some state members. We'll have commissioners and state energy office staff from Illinois, California, Rhode Island, and New Jersey, some of the states with more well-developed microgrid programs or policies. They will share what's going on in their states and lessons that they would wish to impart to states that are earlier in the development process. We'll take a break, and then we'll go into the facilitated breakout groups. And then finally, we'll have some time towards the end of the day to hear from you all on how we can be successful in this working group going forward. And there is a second day. We will be meeting tomorrow morning from 8:30 to 11:30. Note that this will be at a different hotel. It will be at 901 L Street Northwest. The address is in the agenda. And the agenda tomorrow is really dedicated to hearing from DOE, EPA, and the national labs on existing tools and resources for state microgrid deployment. So now we would like to hear a little bit from you all. Would like each person here to share your name, your title, and organization or state, and then what you think is the biggest challenge to microgrid development in your state, as well as one question that you would like answered today. So we'll we start on this side, and yeah, just be sure to pass the microphone along. And for those of you in the back, we have some handheld microphones that we'll come back with when we get to you all.
Hi, my name is Amanda Lemaster, and I've got Greg Bone with me. We're from the state of Kentucky. I'm the Energy Assurance Coordinator for the state. One thing that we would find challenging is just finding locations for microgrids, figuring out what the best location is, and we're hoping to get that out of it today. I have a lot of questions. Let's see. I think we're just going to stick with how to identify best locations for microgrid resiliency.
Hi, I'm Robert Young from the state of Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection's Energy Program Office. I guess the biggest challenge for us is trying to figure out where to start. There's probably lots of disparate efforts going on, but from the state energy office, getting a better overview and understanding of all the disparate efforts and coordinating them and helping to grow those opportunities and provide support. And the question I would like answered is just see other success stories and you know, learn what made them successful. Pass it on.
Hi, I'm Megan Levy from the Wisconsin Office of Energy Innovation. We're the state's energy office housed at the Public Service Commission, so we get to do both of those things. And I would say my title is Energy Assurance Coordinator as well as Local Energy Programs Director. So our biggest challenge in microgrid development is probably a policy challenge. We don't allow third-party ownership of energy generation outside of like a merchant peaker plant. So it's an interesting policy landscape in Wisconsin, and there's some movement on that these days. And I think the question I'd like answered today is, I'm really working on creating partnerships with utilities to get the data that we need to really understand, similar to Kentucky, like the proper locations that would contribute to total grid resilience as well as the resilience of individual communities that we're working with.
Shelley Peterson with the Iowa State Energy Office housed at the Economic Development Authority. Our biggest challenge would be by the time you take investor-owned utilities, municipal utilities, and RECs, there's well over 100 players in the state. So we're going to have to try to find a way to work with all of them. And I guess, what we're trying to find out here is to determine what the role of the State Energy Office can be as this discussion begins in Iowa.
Hello, I'm David Earn with the California Energy Commission. And I see the biggest challenge for us are a couple of things. One is reducing the challenges with interconnection, making those easier and more streamlined so developers know that they can get a microgrid put in more efficiently, as well as finding, as well as incentivizing the market to develop more simplified packages that can be deployed more easily rather than having unique designs for every single facility. People don't like the word plug and play, but it gives a little bit better image of what I think we need to go to as a market. And learning today about what others are doing and how we can expand the market so we can drive innovation around the country.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Tom Stanton. I work for the National Regulatory Research Institute, which you can think of like the research department of NARUC. We're one big happy NARUC family now, and NRRI offices are in the same NARUC headquarters building. I work from my home in Michigan. I used to work for the Michigan Public Service Commission staff, and my interest in microgrids started because there was a pretty steady stream of developers coming into our office in Michigan asking how they could build their new microgrid building, whatever it was. We saw many different kinds, and invariably that was illegal in Michigan. So I got really interested in how did we get in this situation where practical, good, important technologies are essentially against the rules or against the laws. I've already written one small paper about microgrids, and I'm planning to do a much bigger work on microgrid policy. And I'm here particularly to learn what the states might need so that our products can be responsive to your needs. Thank you.
I'm Donna NARUC-NASEO. I'm the Senior Advisor for Energy Law Programs at George Washington University. I'm not here representing any state. I work with students thinking about microgrids, and we're slowly working our way across every state. It will take a while. I have been thinking very hard about how to regulate microgrids, and so I'm very interested in the progress you're making, the way you're thinking about the problem, how you're approaching it, and also the aspect of how we value microgrids, thinking about what they can provide in addition to resiliency that might increase their cost effectiveness, and how we capture those values and monetize them.
Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Durkers with the Department of Energy's State Energy Program. And so we support all state energy offices, work closely with NASEO as well as NARUC on a number of projects, and happy to be here. In particular, I've got a state background, and so working with the National Government Association and work before that. So I'm very interested in sort of how we can support states. It's also my job at DOA. So I'm looking forward to doing that. In particular, we have a project that Dan mentioned that is sort of the second iteration of the work in New Jersey, where 13 towns have feasibility studies. And so we are looking at how do you do procurement based on the information from those feasibility studies, and we're working with Dan on that and others. And so I believe there's folks from the NJBPU who will be here as well. So looking forward to being here. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Paul Wen. I'm a contractor supporting DOE Office of Electricity Grants Program. So I don't represent any state, and the question I would like to get a clear picture is where we are in microgrid deployment as far as the commercial viability goes.
today, okay, and if we are defining commercial viability with and without federal state support, and if we have to rely on state and federal support, that's, if that's the status, then if that's the case, now how do we move forward the microgrid so that we can one day lean away from state and federal support?
Hi, Larissa Dobriansky, not with the state as well, assisting as well, Danton, and like to just build on what Paul had to say. My focus has been a lot on, well, what are the legal regulatory disincentives that are embedded in our legacy regulatory system that could be impeding microgrid development and the capability of utilities, non-utilities, communities, and our power grid from tapping into the net benefits that microgrids can offer. And I know firsthand from the terrific pilots and demonstrations that USDOE has funded that technically there is the feasibility and microgrids have the potential to really offer quite an array of benefits. But it's how can we integrate that into an evolving, transforming grid, as well as, in fact, also evolving communities from the built environment and infrastructure standpoint. So the other part also that I focus on, what are the opportunities for collaboration between DOE and states, communities? How can DOE bring in its knowledge base and through the labs to provide the tools, methods, the kind of assistance that could enable really great demonstrations that could generate lessons learned and help to really better inform decision making as to the kinds of reforms that are needed.
Hi, my name is Megan Sussman. I'm with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Community Revitalization, so not representing a state either. And what I'd like to learn today is how we can help states and utilities take community design into consideration when they're making decisions about funding, siting, and implementing microgrids so that they can get multiple community benefits out of that investment.
Hi, I'm Harry Cutler with the Smart Electric Power Alliance. I'm a senior analyst there. Excuse me. I'm not with a state either, obviously. So 70% of state commissions across the U.S. are members of ours. So today I'm here to get a better understanding of the top of mind issues for our members and try to figure out how we can serve them better and create content that will help them.
Hi, I'm Megan Wu. I'm the technical manager with the Electric Power Division with the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities. One of the biggest challenges we found is that utilities are resistant to microgrid because the private parties that propose microgrid are proposing to control part of the distribution system that is owned by the utilities. So we have been struggling with this ownership structure and the management structure of microgrid. And one of our sister agencies, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, they have given out grants to entities to do feasibility studies for microgrid. And many of them are found not to be feasible in terms of cost effectiveness. And also there's a gray area whether this is defined as a microgrid or it's just simply a storage plus solar facility combination. One way we want to sort of approach microgrid in Massachusetts is to try to explore third-party participation in the utilities distribution system planning process. But again, this process is normally done within the utilities and it's not open to any other parties. So I'm here today, hopefully can hear something about, some experience about that approach as well.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to be one of the facilitators. My name is Susan Mora. I'm with Exelon. I'm Director of Utility Initiatives. I'm not here on behalf of any state, and honestly, I'm not really here on behalf of Exelon in terms of any of our specific utilities or jurisdictions. So I'm speaking from the point of experience of having interacted in a lot of these groups. And SEPA's working group on microgrids, in the stakeholder process here in the District of Columbia on microgrids that was part of their grid modernization proceeding, and speaking from the utility perspective kind of more broadly for the industry. I think the biggest challenge that I've identified is that if you think about the unique value of a microgrid being resiliency and not having a really tested and true economic way of defining the value of resiliency, I think that's the biggest challenge right now. If that's the single largest value stream, it'd be nice to be able to put a number on it, and there really isn't a metric out there for doing that right now, even though there's some in development at DHS and other places. And then I think the other question that I would like to see answered is when, whether it's a utility developing a microgrid or a community developing a microgrid or a third party developing a microgrid, I think it's really key to try to understand what you're trying to achieve. And so I think my question is, what do you want from your microgrid when you're considering the development? And let's talk about the array of solutions that might be able to get you what you want. We've heard people talk about microgrids as a solution for bringing more DERs on the system. Perhaps there might be other ways to get to that, but I think that's one of the key questions that needs to be asked is, what are you trying to achieve?
And Susan sets me up. David McGowan, I'm a senior advisor consultant to the U.S. Army Office of Energy Initiatives, and I live in this space right now of trying to define resilience for the military. And as a result, I'm discovering very quickly that there's much difference between some of the issues we have as a campus in the community and its energy resilience impact on that community, and thus participating as now Army members of NARUC and talking to state energy officials, we are clearly seeing that there's a very quickly emerging confluence between all of our needs to support the community. Discussions the past couple of days about if our civilians can't come onto the base immediately after the event, can we actually operate? And there are some answers to that we're not going to share here today. But I also do represent, and I'm actually getting over the shock, Dan, that's after 10 years of being on the DOE, once representing, what was it, USDOE, OERE, OWIP, SEP, TAPR, that did actually exist. The SEP Technical Assistance Program for Puerto Rico a while, that New Jersey's actually on a list somewhere, Dan, is actually staggering because for decades we weren't. But within all of this, my question for all of us is, how do we share information? Because I represent the antithesis of what we need here. And that is, we have an industry that's built on caricatures of me. And I love Lynn Good for calling us out, the CEO of Duke Energy. The problem is the 50-something, now 60-something, male engineer that's been trained to be right for their entire life, or his equivalent as a male lawyer that's been trained to be right for their entire life, in this new industry that's never existed before. So anybody that's coming in telling you they're right, they're probably wrong. And how do we manage around that? And therefore, I use Kira a lot on this, is Lynn's prototype of who we've got to listen to is a 28-year-old female with an iPad equipped with blockchain who doesn't give a stuff how the utilities are used to do it. There's all these new models. So how do we communicate with each other to be able to grab that initiative, grab that intelligence for new systems that actually make these microgrids work for communities?
All right, let's go around the back. Hi, Jeff Morris with Schneider Electric North America. We've built about 300 microgrids across North America, and really here to observe and not interfere, I think, at this point. But obviously, a lot of experience in a lot of different markets. Probably two of the biggest issues for us is trying to figure out how to get to the Hoboken model for town square resiliency with microgrids. And the question of scaling is one that seems to always fall short with the way states are pushing out pilot projects for you can do 10 fire stations, and the design and engineering is probably pretty similar for the design for doing 100 fire stations of common functions. And so we're trying to have discussions about how you scale smaller systems, because there's a lot of interest from large companies of doing big university campuses, but for smaller police stations and fire stations, the scaling is the big question.
I'm Mary Lasky from Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and I'm mainly concerned about the resilience of microgrids and what we do about baking in that resilience into the microgrid at the time that it's being installed so that its cost is not so much and that you minimize that and not try to do it later. And so we have a chance with microgrids of really making the whole electric system so much more resilient. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity.
Hi, I'm Ken Colburn from the Regulatory Assistance Project. I'm just here as an observer, but I'm reminded that the number of goals that one could answer to the question of what's your purpose is so broad that it indicates an exceptional opportunity for microgrids, resilience, DERs, transactive energy, so forth. So I'd like to move toward lots of pilots.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Odom, and I'm with Synapse Energy Economics. I'm also just here to sort of hear what you all have to say. Our organization has several partnerships with some of the national laboratories and state energy offices on resiliency and creating resilient communities. So I sort of want to hear like the dialogue that you guys are engaging in with communities on how to make such a collaborative effort of a microgrid happen.
I'm Dominic Libertor. I'm a Logistics and Finance Officer at NARUC. I'm actually the guy you guys checked in with. If I missed you, I'm sorry. I'm just here to be a sponge and soak it all in. Thanks so much.
I'm Purani Ramachandran. I'm with DC Public Service Commission. I'm here more to observe and listen to what's happening across all the states here in the country. And my biggest question is, what happens when you have multiple customers instead of it's a single customer like a university or hospital? Who is going to be responsible at the end of the day for the regulation, reliability, and things as such?
Hi, I'm Lola Infante. I'm with the Edison Electric Institute. I'm here as an observer as well. And I guess my biggest question is really understanding what all of your priorities are and what your challenges that you're facing are, so we can maybe see how we can help and collaborate and work together in the future.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Alex Fisher. I'm with the District of Columbia State Energy Office. So Purani already asked my question, which is, how do we get a regulatory roadmap to where we're encouraging third-party multi-customer microgrids? And so my question would just be, how are other states treating that?
Good afternoon, Pamela Polt with NextEra Energy Resources. We're an independent power producer, and I think my question would be along the lines of quantifying how your discussion on how to quantify the benefits of various benefits to microgrids. So looking forward to discussion.
Good afternoon. My name is Niharika Nayak-Jindal. I'm with the Environmental Protection Agency. I work in the CHP Partnership Program, and over the past few years, we've been closely following the activities around microgrids, as a lot of the initial microgrids have had CHP as a kind of baseload source within it. As the energy kind of environment has been transforming, has been changing, we're continuing to monitor what's going on. We also have tools, and we look forward to presenting one of them tomorrow in conjunction with my colleagues in the Office of Community Revitalization that focuses on resiliency. My main desire, besides getting your feedback on the tools we have, is better understanding this group's challenge around microgrids. A lot of the things that are of concern have been voiced by others so far, and would really like to get your take on it. Thank you.
All right, go to Kirsten.
Hi, my name is Kirsten Brookles. I'm the Program Director for Electricity at NASEO, and I'm very excited about this project, not only because it's combining my two previous and one current employers, CUE, NARUC, and NASEO, but also because I'm really interested to learning from all of you, and all of the questions and challenges that you've already identified are exactly what I'm thinking and wondering about. So I'm excited to maybe get some answers throughout these 2 days.
Great, thank you. My name is Jennifer Potter. I'm Commissioner with the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission. Both Megans touched on my points a lot. Megan brought up that the third-party delivery of electricity or customer delivery of electricity is actually prohibited by state law.
In order to do so, you have to become a utility that's certified with the Public Utilities Commission. So recent legislation around microgrids has potentially loosened that requirement, but it's up for our interpretation and hopefully decision how that will be ruled upon in an open proceeding that we have right now on the microgrid service tariff. And that proceeding, we are looking at trying to address that. That proceeding is focused primarily on outages and resiliency, so it's not looking at grid services at this point, but it is something that we anticipate working through in the next phase. We should have a decision in order out by this summer on a new tariff, so we're looking forward to that. I think that the big thing that we're running up against, as Megan talked about, is the resistance of utilities to adopt and incorporate microgrids has been fairly significant. They keep pointing back to the law, stating that they can't use the distribution system without becoming a certified utility. So that's a big consideration, and like to hear about how other entities have been working with utilities to encourage them to adopt microgrids or to incorporate them into their business model. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks. I, of course, defer to the states. A lot of great questions, but one personal question I have is maybe a different valuation take. In so many states, governors and legislatures have set maybe resilience-related goals, climate goals, a long list of goals and activities, some of them voluntary, some of them requirements. And having some sense or analysis that includes economic analysis as well as valuation around resilience. To answer the question is, how do microgrids with either particular sectors or how they're applied in the state, how might they help in reaching those goals, and what's the cost benefit associated with it? So a little different valuation question, and in part because we often see energy offices in the position of having to develop that kind of information, and it wouldn't surprise me if it came up at some point in the near term.
Hi, I'm Mary Throne. I'm the Deputy Chair of the Wyoming Public Service Commission. I am here in large part because in Wyoming we haven't had a lot of interest in this subject. We've been busy dealing with a lot of other issues, and I think it's an opportunity for me and to get ahead of the issue. We do have a pretty traditional utility structure, so I think all these issues about third parties would also apply in Wyoming. And, as a extraordinarily rural state, not many people, lots of land, also interested in what applicability microgrids might have in that environment.
Good afternoon. My name is Greer Gillis. I am a commissioner here in Washington, D.C. with the D.C. Public Service Commission. You've already heard from Susan, Parani, and Jennifer about some of the issues we faced as we went through our grid modernization proceeding over the past 18 months. Microgrids came up a lot in the discussion, and a lot of what came up in that discussion was how do we actually treat microgrids from a regulatory format, particularly third-party microgrids. So it's a question that's still unanswered for us. So that's one of the reasons we will proceed with a microgrid proceeding later this year, to actually have everyone come in and tell us how we should look at it from a regulatory framework, the variety options of microgrid, the variety of microgrid types that are out there, what other standards or things that we need to do to make sure that we're looking at all cases that apply. Because we're finding that many third parties, many universities, many hospitals, like Parani said, they're going forward with microgrid development. We're even finding that many of our own sister agencies in DC government are moving forward with microgrids. So we realize this is a question we need to answer, and we want to be on the forefront of that. So my goal for being here today is just to see what other states are doing, how they're looking at the regulatory treatment of microgrids, just to glean some insights that I can take back to the commission. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Shauna Beeland. I'm the Chief of Program Development at the Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources. One of the biggest challenges that we're facing in Rhode Island is we have incredibly limited funds for program design for a microgrid program. And so we're looking at, one of the questions that I have is, how should we best deploy our limited funds, whether it's for consultants, feasibility analyses, construction projects. So what's the best path forward? And I hope to learn from other states that have had microgrid programs and how they best deployed their dollars for successful projects that actually were constructed. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Ethan Kimbrough. I'm a commissioner with the Illinois Commerce Commission, and as been pretty much stated throughout this little session, I'm just here to learn about the regulatory issues surrounding microgrid deployment.
Hello, I'm Mike Hornsby with the State of New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, Chief Project Development Officer. Yes, and I feel your pain about the historic regulatory construct that is inhibiting microgrids overall, and in particular, there's a statute that pertains to having only one right-of-way crossing with a privately owned wire for microgrids. We find that to be perhaps the first barrier that we face as we try to make microgrids larger and more common.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sam Kramer. I'm a program director with NASEO. Most of the questions I've had about microgrids have been mentioned by one person or another throughout the roundtable. We're really looking forward to talking about some of the answers.
So I would like to give our participants on the webinar an option to share. Please bear with us. We did test the audio before we started here, but we'll see if we can unmute. Let's see, Marissa, do you want to try talking, and I'll let you know if we can hear you over the audio?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, I'm with Idaho Governor's Office of Energy and Mineral Resources. Most of our challenges, just as Sam said, and questions have been spoken to, so we are also excited to move forward and talk some more about solutions.
Thanks. If anyone else on the webinar line would like to make an introduction, please raise your hand or just ask a question and I'll call on you to unmute. Just to run through who's on the webinar, we have, and please forgive me if I mispronounce your name, we have Bob Kirschmeyer from the Washington Department of Commerce, Brian Edmonds from the DC Public Service Commission, Christina Rivera from the California Public Utilities Commission, Darcy Jones from the Office of Regulatory Staff in South Carolina, Darren Zigich from New Mexico, Forrest Kaiser from the California PUC, George Lynch from the Idaho Office of Energy Resources, John Agan from the Department of Energy EERE office, Justin Rednier from the California PUC, Katie Pegan from the Office of Energy Resources in Idaho, Katie Hatcher from the Environmental Protection Agency, Kevin Dillon from the BPU in New Jersey, Rick Campana from the Office of Regulatory Staff in South Carolina, and Sarah Young from the Wyoming Energy Office. So at this point, we're going to move into a presentation from Sam and I to kind of summarize the outputs from the needs assessment calls that we facilitated with each of the state members in December and January. So during these slides, we'll go over the membership of the state working group. We will relay some common questions that came up in our calls with each state, and we'll talk about some technical assistance needs that we have identified coming through those state calls.
Great. So the first thing we want to talk about is just for those of you who weren't on these calls, the process we kind of used to get the initial information that we've kind of used to guide this in-person working group. One of the things that, and you'll see up here, we have a map to kind of give you a hint as to the key, since I didn't put it up there. If a state is in yellow, that means the SEO, the State Energy Office, is participating in the initiative. If the state is in blue, that means the PUC is participating in the initiative. And states with green, both the SEO and the PUC are participating. And we are also missing two of our territories on there. Puerto Rico will be a green state. I believe both the SEO and PUC are participating there. And then the Virgin Islands, the SEO is participating as well. So when we originally set up this initiative, we were pleasantly surprised to see the breadth and depth of interest in this topic. I think we originally kind of gamed this out. We had thought we'd get about 7 or 8 PUCs and state energy offices, but we ended up with 12 PUCs and almost 20 energy offices. So that was really surprising in a good way, about, you know, just how many of you all were interested in this topic. And if you look at the map, you know, it's really not just, you know, a couple of states on the coast or in the islands. It's really a huge geographic makeup of the entire country, which is great, because then we can kind of talk about microgrids in terms of different regulatory and electricity structures as well, which is obviously a key consideration for their development and deployment. So in order to get a little bit more information on exactly what we should be thinking about and what we should be looking for, you know, obviously we had an idea of what to look for, but the best way to do this is to actually reach out to all of you. So we did a series of 1-hour needs assessment calls with all of the energy offices and all of the public utility commissions participating on the initiative. Great. And so we asked each state or each agency really a series of questions to help kind of get a little bit more in-depth information as to what everyone's thinking about and what everyone's looking to do. So really kind of, if you look on the slide behind you, or if you're watching on the webinar, you know, if you just look at the slide deck, we had a number of questions we asked all of you, and really just kind of figuring out who's doing what barriers are out there that everyone's still kind of seeing, you know, what are the challenges. And really, what are your general questions? What are your thoughts? Where do you really need the most help? So that way we can kind of dig in on this and really provide the best technical assistance that we can. If you go to the next slide, we ended up with, I kind of handpicked, you know, 3 of these quotes here from some folks that we interviewed, really kind of get the sense of what we're kind of looking at, because a lot of these quotes kind of speak to what most of you said in some form or another over the course of the assessment calls, thinking about, you know, what are the management structures to these microgrids? What are the ownership structures? How do we figure out the management? You know, where do the utilities fit into the whole piece here? That was a big one that a lot of people had questions with, is the role of the utilities, and also rate design as well. And also, you know, for a lot of states, these microgrids dovetail with deep decarbonization strategies, and so many states had questions about, you know, how do you kind of minimize the carbon emissions if you're going to deploy these microgrids? How do you install DERs? How does that kind of work within the system? And obviously, many people had the similar questions about how do we value? What is the economic value of microgrids? How do we kind of quantify this value that they're providing? And really thinking about, you know, how do we make sure resiliency is included when we design these out. Kira, if you want to talk about some definitions here.
Sure. So initially we had some questions from states on just defining a microgrid, and actually I want to recognize Susan with Exelon for leading one of our facilitation groups. And as we were talking, she had mentioned that in participating in the grid modernization proceeding in DC, the definition of a microgrid was a very drawn out issue in the working group. So that came up, as well as the components and ownership structures for microgrids. We did borrow from DOE on the definition of a microgrid, being a group of interconnected loads and DERs within clearly defined electrical boundaries that acts as a single controllable entity with respect to the grid. Microgrid can connect and disconnect from the grid to enable it to operate in both grid connected or island mode. And we thought that this table from the New Jersey BPU did a good job of kind of breaking down different types of microgrids. They sort of increase in complexity as you go through the levels, but starting with a single facility that can include 1 or more DERs, just 1 facility, meter, and owner, into a campus microgrid that still has 1 owner but includes multiple meters and facilities, and then out to a multi-user community microgrid, which are more complex, that can include multiple owners, meters, facilities, and DERs. The components of a microgrid can include critical load or critical loads, distributed energy resources, the distribution system, as well as controls and a point of common coupling. And finally, on ownership structures, as has come up in some of the introductory questions from everyone, there are a variety of ownership structures. There can be utility-owned microgrids or hybrid, where a utility may own the distribution system and other entities or third parties or customers own the DERs themselves. Customer or host property owned. These can be either public, owned by municipalities, or private sector, as well as third party owned, and this can include also a public-private partnership model.
So we also had a number of questions around thinking about the cost, the benefits, and then planning around microgrids, including, how do we make, again, like I mentioned earlier, how do we ensure microgrids are reducing carbon emissions or complying with state-mandated clean energy goals? How to consider these microgrids in the form of resource planning or in broader grid modernization initiatives that a lot of states are thinking about. And this is really the big one here. This is the one that every single state we interviewed mentioned as a topic is really how to quantify the benefits of resiliency and how to really how to figure out how to really attach numbers to the value that increased resiliency provides. And additionally, a lot of states mention, what are the tools and resources out there that we can really use to kind of help us think through some of these issues. And fortunately, there are several, so we'll be talking about that on day 2 here.
We additionally came across a lot of questions around developing a market for microgrids. So, of course, the role of utilities, as has come up, how states can foster competition, but also, rapid development in the microgrid market, financing and ownership structures, certainly questions around siting and permitting, as our colleagues from Kentucky mentioned, and then also how to integrate DERs and how to integrate different sources of generation into microgrids. And then finally, around the capabilities of microgrids, understanding what microgrids can offer in terms of resilience and grid services and perhaps other benefits to the community, and how these capabilities can be enabled or compensated.
So one of the things we also made sure to ask all of you participating on these calls is really, what are you seeing as current barriers to microgrid deployment in your state? And so we had we have a number of barriers that came up on many of these calls, and really including a lack of definition of what a microgrid is. There's every microgrid is going to look a little different, which can make it a little more complicated. How to kind of think about developing and deploying them. It's hard to have a standardized sort of structure for each microgrid out there. Several of you mentioned a lack of an established tariff structure and confusion over who pays for it, who pays for what. Obviously there's been issues with right-of-ways and the definition of a public utility, and also a little bit of a conflict between thinking about procuring clean energy sources for microgrids versus using least cost energy sources. And then also thinking about just what are the capabilities of microgrids to improve grid services as well as resilience.
So we tried to translate these into technical assistance needs that NARUC-NASEO and the Department of Energy and national labs could potentially help states with. So we came up with 5 needs. First, developing methods to quantify resilience. This is obviously a big issue for many states. We will be discussing this in the breakout group that I will be leading. I'll discuss some of the work that NARUC did with some partners under the National Renewable Energy Lab's Solar Energy Innovation Network. Second, understanding different regulatory regimes needed to smooth microgrid development and facilitate more deployment. Understanding different financing structures that can be utilized to finance microgrids. This can include money available through the federal government, through HUD or DHS, through state loan or grant programs for microgrids, which we'll hear about more at the next panel. Fourth, identifying ownership structures for microgrids that make sense for all parties, finding a productive relationship between utilities, third parties, customers, and states, and then delineating the role that utilities can play in owning or operating parts of all microgrid systems.
So obviously there's a lot to unpack with these slides and all the information that you provided for us. So the question becomes, now that we've got all this information and now we're all here at this meeting, where do we go from here? So obviously this is the beginning of a technical assistance effort that we'll be working on together that spans the next 2 years. The first year will consist of a lot of technical assistance to the entire working group in the form of briefing papers, webinars, calls with experts. You have it on a number of the topics that you all have identified as being high priority issues for your agencies to think about. And this will culminate in year 2 in the development of a regulatory framework for really kind of increasing microgrid deployment and kind of smoothing out some of the barriers towards microgrids that currently exist in many of your states.
So before we wrap up with this session, I do want to note that we did these needs assessment calls with every state, but they may not necessarily have been with everyone in this room. So I want to invite anyone who did a call and has a question or a comment that we haven't reflected yet, or anyone from a state who didn't get a chance to actually speak with us during these needs assessment calls to let us know what your priorities are, if they're reflected in this presentation, or if there's a new point that you'd like to bring up.
Hi, I'm Tom Stanton again. I didn't want to derail the conversation by any means, but in your definition, you talk about microgrids only in the context of those that will be interconnected with a wide area grid. And yet we have lots of places like Alaska. I know we dealt some with the people in Ontario, Calgary, where there are all kinds of remote villages presently served by diesel-powered generators on an individual grid that's not part of a bigger grid. So one of my very deep interests is trying to identify the regulatory structures that might be the same, whether or not there's the presence of a wide area grid. I don't know that this needs to change the discussion today at all, but as we look in the future, if the cheapest way to serve those customers in remote areas is not by trying to bring them transmission lines, it's something I think we need to know before we start spending that $1 trillion to extend the transmission lines to the far corners of the planet.
All right, seeing no other comments, why don't we take a quick break and we'll transition into our next panel with our state members from California, Illinois, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. So we'll break until 2 o'clock. It's 1:52 right now. We have coffee set up in the back of the room as well as some snacks. Restrooms are outside, so we'll reconvene in 10 minutes.
Give me something here.
Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check.
It's not coming out in the room. Oh. Is it loud though? Can you hear me loud and clear? Loud and clear. Okay. Which one is this one? This one? Ooh. How about now? Can you hear me? Loud and clear. Is it clear? If I'm bringing it up now. Is it louder? All right.
Hello, hello. Check, check.
Check, 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 check two, check two, check two. You hear me? Check two. Mike still hears me, but we don't have anything in the room. Check two, check two, check two, check two. Oh, that's crazy. Check two, 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Check two, two, two. Check two, two, two. 1 2. Wow, come on, man. Check 1 2 2 2. See, you're hitting right here. We're good here. See, 1 2 2 2. Check, check, 2 2 2. Right, yeah. No, we don't have it. I mean, he's good, but nothing master. Check 2 1 2 2 2. How do we? 1 2. Check 2 2 2 2 2. Down. Check 2 2 2 2 2. You still hear me, Mike? You gotta be. Wow. Check 2 2. Good. Okay. 1 2. Yeah, it's this. The telos. All right. Check 2 2 2. No, no, no. Check 2. Check 2 2 2 2. Yes. Yes. Okay. Check 2 2 2. All right. Check 2.
All right, let's get started with our next panel. I'm really pleased. A lot of you on the needs assessment calls identified kind of wanting to hear from other states and wanting to hear from states that have maybe already more experience with microgrids. And so I'm very pleased that we have this panel today, which is going to talk about some of the states that have taken actions to incentivize microgrids. And I'm very pleased to have a panel consisting of Commissioner Kimbrell from Illinois Commerce Commission, Commissioner Genevieve Shiroma from the California Public Utilities Commission, joined by her colleague from the California Energy Commission, David Ernst, and Shauna Bieland, who's the Chief of Program Development, Renewables, Solar, Rhode Island of the Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources, and Mike Hornsby, the Chief Project Development Officer of the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. So I really appreciate all your willingness to come and tell us about all the great things that you're doing in your states about microgrids. Before we begin, I do have to make a quick announcement that because we're talking about some of the issues that are within proceedings at, for example, the California Public Utility Commissions, if you are party of a proceeding in California or in Illinois, I would like to ask you to unfortunately leave the room for this panel because we want to make sure that we stay clear of any kind of conflict of interest, ex parte rules, etc. So just as a heads up. So with that, without further ado, would like to turn it over to Commissioner Kimbrell to talk about the experience in Illinois.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name's Commissioner Douglas Ethan Kimbrell, and at the time that I'm here to talk about the Brownsville microgrid in Illinois, which is on the south side of Chicago, just west of the lake, a couple blocks west of the lake, probably about 10 minutes from downtown. I'm a little further south of that area, right along the lake as well. But at the time that this docket was filed, on July 28th of 2017. I happen to be the Chief Administrative Law Judge of the Commerce Commission. So ComEd filed this docket, the petition concerning the implementation of a demonstration distribution microgrid is how it was titled. And I thought, although I didn't have many dockets, I was basically running the division. I was like, oh, this sounds like an interesting and sexy case. I'll assign it to myself. And I did, and that was a good idea at the time until I got appointed, or knew I was going to get appointed. And then it was like a rush to like phase out of this position and definitely get this docket done, or at least get the proposed order on its way before I transition to the other job. But anyways, so ComEd filed this docket pursuant to Section 10-101 of the Illinois Public Utilities Act and requested that the Commission issue an order making certain rate-related findings regarding its proposed distribution microgrid demonstration project and study, which again we call the Brownsville microgrid because Brownsville is the area in which it was selected to be in. So they also wanted, well, more specifically, ComEd wanted us to find, the Commission to find that the project would be prudent and reasonable, and that the project would support ComEd's provision of delivery services, and that we should approve the proposed accounting and rate treatment, and also confirm that the project will not impair the rights of customers to select their energy supplier. The goals of the project were to learn about the value of microgrids, grid security and reliability, best practices for siting microgrids, best practices in integrating distributed energy resources into the grid, microgrid operation and coordination among microgrids, emerging technologies and standards, third-party non-storage DER ownership, clustering of microgrids, and the impact of increased resiliency on economic development. One other reason why this grid was proposed to be in the Brownsville area is because the Illinois Institute of Technology has a microgrid, so there was an opportunity for the two to cluster. So the study of the project is supposed to take place, or is taking place, over a 10-year period, and the result would be a report of the learnings over that time frame. So there were two phases to the rollout of the microgrid. The first phase, which estimated cost was $8 million, would cover 4 blocks west and basically 6 blocks east, north and south, excuse me. So about 24 city blocks and 490 customers. Yeah, and the second phase, which was estimated to cost $17 million, would add an additional 16 blocks and 570 customers. This area also would include, wanted to include critical public service customers, which would include schools, nursing homes, the Chicago Police Department headquarters, a library, as well as the IIT's microgrid. So there were residential, commercial, and small industrial customers. That first phase would only cover, I'm sorry. So the first phase, there was the Department of Energy supported. Excuse me, I'm tired. I'm really exhausted, but I'm going to get it together for you, I promise. So the Department of Energy supported the project with 2 grants. The first grant was for $1.2 million to research, develop, and test an advanced microgrid controller capable of controlling the project and integrating it with the existing neighboring IET microgrid. The second grant was for $4 million from the DOE Sustainable and Holistic Integration of Energy Storage and Solar, and that was to design and deploy solar and battery storage technology in a microgrid. The first phase also regarding the SHINES grant requirements from the DOE regarding integrating the smart inverter technology, solar, PV, and battery storage in a microgrid operation. It included 2.5 megawatts of load and required reconfiguration of an existing feeder along with associated cable reconnections and a 12 kilowatt circuit extension to enable microgrid configuration. Installation of at least 0.75 megawatts of solar PV as well as 0.5 megawatts of battery storage was also part of that phase. ComEd was required also to file certifications in order to get from phase 1 to phase 2. So on January 3rd of 2019, ComEd filed a certification that the microgrid master controller was operating satisfactorily and was within design parameters. On May 6th of 2019, ComEd also filed a certification that the project meets the minimum qualifications for receipt of the funding under the U.S. DOE SHINES grant. And then on July 1st of 2019, they filed a certification that phase 1 had been successfully implemented and tested, and they were ready to proceed finally to phase 2. I should also note that in February of 2019, on February 28th, ComEd was required to file its first annual report regarding the progress that had been made in this project. So phase 2 added 4.5 megawatts of load along with approximately 7 megawatts of controllable generation resources. In addition to the fact, as I mentioned before, that it was going to, at this phase, going to be able to cluster with the existing microgrid at IAT. As I mentioned, phase 2 was going to cost approximately $17 million, depending on the mix of DER incorporated in the outcome of the competitive procurement process. Regarding battery storage, it was determined that ComEd would own the battery energy storage, which would solely function as part of the distribution grid, but that ComEd would not own the remainder of the project DER. The project also incorporated a full, as you would imagine, would incorporate a full feeder, which is directly interconnected at the supply substation. Regarding cost of generation investments owned by third parties and leased by ComEd, these would be recorded, as well as other expenditures on the project, these would be recorded as distribution costs. Revenues from DER from the project would be recorded as a reduction of unaccounted for energy. Retail electric supplier customers within the project footprint would also still be able to choose alternative suppliers and would be billed for delivery service and supply by ComEd, and islanding would not affect customer choice. In 2020, the Commission is expecting an initial metrics cost-benefit report. So that's something that we've been eagerly awaiting, actually. Again, these annual reports that I referred to before that are filed in February of each year, those will go on for the next 9 years. And then at the conclusion of the study, there'll be a final comprehensive report. And that's all I've got. I struggled through it, but we got there.
Thank you, Commissioner. I would suggest we hold all questions until the panelists finish with their presentations. So then I would like to turn it over to Commissioner Sharoma, please.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I think we've got some California Public Utility Commission staff on the listening in through the webinar as well. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a lot going on in California, and between, well, we've just got a lot going on, wildfires, bankruptcies, and what have you, and in and around all that, you know, microgrids plays a role for resiliency. So, first of all, I'll discuss a little bit of the roadmap as far as how we distribute funds and guidance on our research and development program. And then David Earn from the California Energy Commission will tell you about the microgrid research and development projects that they've managed successfully with the research and development funding. And then I'll follow that with an overview of our latest proceeding out in California on bringing microgrids to, lack of a better way to put it, to market, okay, for public entities, private entities, for our electric utilities. And in particular, in response to the public safety power shutoffs, which are the circumstances we faced substantially this past fall, where the conditions were such that our electric utilities de-energized. They shut off distribution lines and transmission lines to avoid fires. But some of those shutoffs lasted 2 days to 8 days, not 2 hours to 8 hours. So, meanwhile, if anyone is looking for follow-up resources on what we're doing, my chief of staff is here, Luam Tesfaye. Just connect with Luam. All right. So the electric program investment charge, EPIC. The California Commission oversees, the CPUC oversees 3 large research, development, and deployment programs to drive investment in emerging technologies. And they have all these acronyms, okay, EPIC, PEERS, EF, microgrids, okay. What these are all geared towards research and development to increase the benefits, because ratepayers are paying for all of these programs, is to increase reliability, safety, and ultimately what we hope will be lower cost for providing reliable power, reliable energy. And in our oversight of the EPIC program, we issue decisions at the California Public Utilities Commission that give direction to program administrators like the investor-owned utilities and the California Energy Commission on what kind of research and development projects to pursue. Back in 2015, we approved an Energy Commission program that included microgrid research and development, and it's been quite, I would say it's been quite successful. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to David with the Energy Commission, a sister agency, to talk about those successes.
Hello, again, I'm David Earn from the California Energy Commission, and they're going to switch over to my slides here. So I'm going to talk a little bit. So my team within the R&D division within the Energy Commission focuses on our grid-connected research. That's microgrids, energy storage, vehicle grid integration, some distribution modeling related work. So our microgrid research actually goes back more than a decade. So there was a prior program before the EPIC program called PEER. And in that program, we started working on really what are the challenges and overcoming those challenges for interconnecting a variety of distributed energy resources. So that was still back in the days of manual switching between systems, but it was an important step in the process. Then in 2015, we had a solicitation that focused on actually the development of fully functional microgrids that would provide resilience. So that's the middle box up there. That grant funding opportunity funded 7 microgrids that were focused on critical facilities, and there were 4 of them on critical facilities, and then 3 on integration of a large number of distributed energy resources. And so those projects proceeded until early last year when they all wrapped up, and I'll talk a little bit about those. And then we just initiated a new grant funding opportunity last year with 9 new microgrids with the intent of demonstrating that we could create commercially replicable microgrid solutions. And so based on the previous research, we recognized that the maturity of controllers was getting better, although there's still some way to go on that. And that we were starting to see for those early 7 microgrids that there was a substantial amount of savings that was occurring as a result of those on a day-to-day basis. And so we started seeing better economics. And in fact, from that previous solicitation, we had several companies that started up in California with the express solution of creating microgrids for critical facilities. And so we're starting to see some of that commercial application, being able to make a business case out of it, and we want to be able to demonstrate that with the most current ones that are ongoing. We've had a variety of microgrids tested. So at this count so far, considering all the research that we have going on at the R&D division, we have about 40 different microgrids being funded within the state, having been or are funded. And we're actually finding that a variety of projects, for whatever reason, maybe they weren't originally geared to be microgrids, but they're pursuing microgrids as part of a solution. So it might even be an efficiency project out of our efficiency program, and they're adding to efficiency by putting in a microgrid controller and storage and making a microgrid out of it. So it's amazing how the proliferation of microgrids is growing within the state. We have multiple models. We have third party, we have owner operated, and we have utility. And we also have AC and DC coupled. And you can see they're spread out over the entire state. So we have a pretty good representation of opportunities. Additionally, wrong button, we have a variety of applications. And so as I mentioned, we had in our previous solicitation, we had a number of critical facilities. Those have been expanded in our most recent solicitation to have more critical facilities, and I'll talk about a few of those. We have a couple major ports in the state that are deploying microgrids for their solutions. 3 military installations that are also have microgrids being funded through our program, communities, and industrial facilities. So I'm going to talk about a few of these I think are critical and relate to some of the questions that were brought up today. So the fire stations that are up there is one of the applications where a company developed itself in California. Started out with one of our solicitations and has now developed kind of a package system that they can take out to small facilities like fire stations or police stations, et cetera, and deploy those relatively easily. And they're operating under a PPA approach, and so they're working with communities to develop PPAs, mostly because communities don't necessarily have the capital right now to be able to deploy these, to buy them on their own. And so they're looking for PPAs as an option for deployment. And so this is a company that's got its start that way and is growing and selling into more communities. They're also developing a cloud-based control software, so they'll be able to manage multiple microgrids around the state or country as the case may be. So they're continuing to grow and evolve. Another one I think is very important is a newer one, which is the airport. That's up in Arcata. That airport is actually going to be a multi-customer microgrid. For those of you who don't know, in the state of California, we have these community choice aggregators, which are a little bit like utilities. In this case, the utility, which is PG&E, will own everything in front of the meter, and the CCA will own everything behind the meter. And they're working on basically example tariffs about how to work those electron flows, whether there's power coming from the grid or if the microgrid is supporting those customers, how they work what the monetary situation looks like during full operation or during islanding. And so that'll be an interesting project to see how the CCA and the utility negotiate some of those tariffs and figure out the cost sharing approach. That system is actually being designed by the Schatz Energy Center up in Humboldt County. They developed a previous microgrid, which is one of our great successes, and that's the Blue Lake Rancheria. That microgrid, you may have read about, has gotten a lot of press nationally. It is actually a casino, but it's also a Red Cross community center, community shelter. And in the most recent power shutoff, it was able to island and provide a fair number of services to the community. So they were able to provide a place for shelter for people to come and charge their phones and whatnot. They also blocked off some rooms that were supported by the microgrid where they could have people who had medical issues, who had equipment that they had to keep running to keep them alive, so they could go to those rooms and keep them charged. And the community considers that islanding saved possibly 4 lives as associated with that microgrid. And they were able to run their gas stations, so they were able to provide fuel to people in the community as well. So it was a pretty impressive show for that microgrid. And in fact, the tribe there has decided to double the size of that microgrid because of the value that it's provided already. So it's a pretty impressive solution. Let's see, one other one that I think I want to mention is the community, one of the community ones, which is our only utility owned. That's the desert picture up there. That is with SDG&E. That actually received funding from Department of Energy as well as the Energy Commission. And that one can island the community, I think the entire community, for up to 4 to 6 hours. It's at the end of a transmission line, suffers from storms and a lot of outages. And so SDG&E can control that community very well with that microgrid. So we've had some really interesting demonstrations. We have ones that are continuing on that are going to be really fascinating to follow, and all of our information is publicly available. So if there's particular reports or summaries that would be valuable for any of the states, please reach out to me and we can get that information to you. We can set up conversations with any of the recipients so you can talk to them directly, understand how they deploy the microgrid, or the customers on how they see the value of the microgrid. Just one other thing that I'll mention is we also have a work stream on energy storage where we look at diversifying the types of energy storage that are available. There's a lot of money that's gone into lithium ion, and we think there are options for other technologies that could provide value, maybe where lithium ion is not the best. And so we have a research effort to diversify the different types of energy storage and also increase duration. So we have a current solicitation open for 10 hours plus of energy storage to be able to demonstrate that kind of technology, because we think that's very valuable, particularly when you're talking about resilience and be able to island for a long period of time. You need to have that additional energy storage. So with that, I think that pretty much wraps up, and I'll turn it back over to Commissioner.
All right, thank you. Let's go to the next slide after that. I think that'll be our last one. Let's see, yes, Senate Bill 1330. Thank you. Okay, thanks a lot. All right, so it's really exciting to see the projects funded by the Energy Commission, because those are the kinds of projects that we hope will inform the standards that we ultimately devise through the microgrids proceeding towards making it easier for whether it's public entities, private sector, the investor-owned utilities to be able to install microgrids. Now, in 2018, the California legislature passed SB 1339. By the way, you know, our legislature out in California, I'm sure this is the case for all states, but at any rate, our legislature in California tends to be very wonkish in terms of really diving into some of these thorny issues that are technical, engineering, scientific, software, and looking to provide requirements for entities such as the Energy Commission, the California CPUC. Anyway, this is one of them that basically directs us to commercialize microgrids. And so in September, we opened up rulemaking, and in particular, just as we were facing the next round of devastating wildfires caused by utility infrastructure. Thankfully, in 2019, the devastation wasn't as horrific as 2018. In 2018 is when we had the Paradise Fire, and we had 85 residents perish, and thousands of homes and commercial structures were burned quickly as the fire started from a transmission line and went through the Feather River Canyon along there and up into the town. So we amplified on our public safety power shutoff rulemaking in allowing utilities to de-energize, in other words, shut off transmission and distribution lines to avoid a fire. And there's certain circumstances, humidity, temperatures, and so forth. And there is a massive vegetation management effort underway. With the, especially in light of the experience of the PSBS's last fall, all the more there has been a clamor for the ability to have microgrids, such as some of the examples that David just outlined, where folks on medical equipment needing 24-hour oxygen tanks running, need CPAP machines through the night, dialysis machines and so forth that are essential. You can't have folks without electricity for 2 days, 8 days, and what have you. There has to be a safety net for vulnerable communities and for firefighters, for police, for governmental agencies that are providing services, water districts and what have you. So we expect to see wildfires again this next season, which starts in June and goes through the fall. So our resiliency, microgrid and resiliency OIR, order instituting rulemaking, is looking for near-term and long-term achievements on 3 tracks. On the near term is to take actions in early 2020. Our goal is second quarter of this year to issue a proposed decision that does provide for some immediate opportunities that can fast track those who are primed and ready with how to do this. Okay? In the longer term, we're evaluating the specific standards, rates, and tariffs to support more massive, microgrid development, and then just ongoing. We have a working group that will look to codify ultimately the standards and interconnection process and procedures, and that will be a little longer term, and also to look at how do we not increase greenhouse gas emissions through microgrid deployment, and how do microgrids have a role? What is their role because we have a 2045 requirement from the legislature and the governor to get to a zero greenhouse gas footprint in 2045. So I will stop there and turn the mic over to our next speaker and be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner David. And just a plug for the Blue Lake Rancheria. There was a great story on NPR about it. So if you Google it and the story comes up, highly recommended. With that, turning it over to Rhode Island.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Let's see if this works from here. It does. Okay, great. So this is our obligatory, I'm Shauna Bieland with the Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources. This is our obligatory Energy Office slide that I will skip through because you all know and love it, I'm sure. So what has Rhode Island done so far? So we're not anywhere close to the 2 states that preceded me on microgrid development, program development, policy development, deployment of microgrids. But we have done some things that I hope might be of interest to you. So the first thing that we did back in 2014, 2015 was we worked with the Rhode Island Emergency Management Agency to define 16 sectors of critical infrastructure, of which energy is one of them. And specifically resiliency is critically important, and that's been, energy and resiliency have been considered lifeline sectors. So that was the framework from where we worked with all of the other things that I'm going to talk about today. So I think it helps to level set when you say, this is critically important and this is why. So climate change is a big element of our renewable energy policies at OER. As you can see, vehicles and heating make up the majority of our carbon emissions, and they will continue to be a priority focus moving forward. In 2014, the Resilient Rhode Island Act established the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council. It's called EC4 because nobody can say that quickly. It also set specific greenhouse gas reduction targets and is helping to guide the effort to help our cities and towns prepare for the effects of climate change, such as sea level rise, being the ocean state, that is a huge priority for us, as well as from violent storms. So this EC4 is a 14-member organization now. It is with various state agencies, all providing input and updates as to what they're doing related to climate change. Fast forward to 2017. OER commissioned a report called The Resilient Microgrids for Rhode Island Critical Services. We conducted this report with a consulting Celtic Energy, and we were able to move it forward with community block grant funding, which was very helpful. This report is over 200 pages long. It does a lot of things, but it really helped the state identify the problem. So we kind of identified it early with EMA in 2014, but we additionally identified the problem in this report. We helped define resiliency and microgrids. They're not the official Rhode Island state definitions, but they're helping guide what we're thinking about for both of these terms. We also identified policy goals and what the difficulty of implementing some of those policy goals are. That's a significant chapter of this report. The policy goals range from the relatively easy, such as setting goals, a lead by example demonstration project on a state critical facility, to the medium, such as designing and running a microgrid incentive program, to the hard stuff that we've been talking about today, so including identifying and addressing right-of-way issues, interconnection standards for large multi-user microgrids, and that's just to name a few. It also did a good job of identifying case study opportunities with projects that were in the design phase of either a retrofit or a new construction. And these case studies or these projects that were ready to move forward also had the additional benefit of not only providing resiliency, but also addressing low and moderate income populations. It was going to be great. So we did all this work, we identified some funding, and everything kind of came to a screeching halt in 2017 because, as many energy offices, it happens, we just ran out of resources. So the report was put on the back burner until the EC4 worked collectively to create a new climate change website for Rhode Island, and the governor hired a director of stormwater and resiliency in 2018. That was a huge step forward. We now had a point person in Rhode Island to help move all of these things that we were doing to the next level. We published the Resilient Roadie Report, which is Rhode Island's first comprehensive climate resilience action strategy, in July of 2018. The strategy identifies priority actions the state can take to build statewide resiliency. It really focuses on the need to work collaboratively with and in support of the municipalities across the state. As part of that, OER was tasked, and rightly so because we had put the report on the back burner, to move forward with some of the recommendations actually included in the report. Also, another result of the Resilient Roadie, a direct result of the Resilient Roadie report was a new program run by the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank called the Municipal Resilience Program. It provides direct support to cities and towns to complete municipal-driven process that will bring together climate change information and local knowledge just to identify projects. That was really the goal of this. Each one of the 5 original municipalities, there's only 39 in Rhode Island, by the way. There are 5 original municipalities in this program, and they were held roundtable workshops and tried to identify what the issues were that they wanted to face, what they faced related to climate change. And many of the projects that were identified were actually energy projects, and that's where our office started paying attention. And these include projects like storage and microgrids. So additional framework for where we're going. We have a goal of 1,000 megawatts of clean energy by the end of this year. And so as of the last metrics, I was really hoping to get Q4 of 2020 or 2019 by the time I did these slides, but it didn't happen. So as of October 1st, there were 809 megawatts. Perhaps you've heard there's a new long-term contract for another 50 that was just signed last week. In addition to this goal, our governor just signed a new executive order for 100% renewables by 2030. Perhaps you might have heard about this in the news. It certainly was big news in our office. It's an important priority for our office to include storage and microgrids in this plan, whatever the plan will be that we're working on right now, to get us there, to make sure that it includes storage and microgrids. And given Rhode Island's small size, the limited land for large-scale renewable deployment, and interconnection challenges, there really isn't a way to get to that goal of by 2030 without microgrids and storage. So what are we doing today? So we're in the process of developing a microgrid incentive program. We have, before I even go into this part, I need to thank Sam and NASEO for hosting a microgrid financing workshop in Rhode Island this past fall. A big shout out to Sam, who had the worst travel situation of all time, flying in and out of Providence, so sorry about that. It was a great discussion that we had. We had multiple state agencies in the room for our microgrid financing workshop. We also had a small handful of developers in the room, and it was really helpful. We've done so much work at the state level, at the municipal level, but then we got to hear from what the industry needs were, and I think that was really helpful for us to frame what the next step is and kind of create an outline for program design for how we're going to actually help move the market in Rhode Island, maybe start a market in Rhode Island. So the working group that we identified in the microgrid financing workshop is helping provide feedback for our design. Obviously, we're not just going to write something and deploy it. We're going to get some feedback on it. So we're in the process of creating that outline and sending it out for stakeholder comment. So we only have a small amount of funds. It's only $1.5 million of Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative money. We're also in the process of deploying a storage incentive program, and we expect that the storage program will deploy first, and then we'll do the microgrid after that, just in case that there's a way to leverage some of those funds. So that's really it for me. I'm happy to take any questions. And I've also included a link to the microgrid report. Even though it was published in 2017, I think it has a lot of value for maybe some other states to look at, not duplicating it and maybe actually taking some of the lessons learned out of there and some of the program design recommendations and policy recommendations.
Thank you, Shauna. And last but not least, New Jersey.
Hello, this is Mike Hornsby from the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. And our microgrid program started, you might say, with Superstorm Sandy in 2012. You've probably all heard stories about Superstorm Sandy. Well, large swaths of the state were without power for 2 weeks or more. So business as usual certainly wasn't cutting it. So in the aftermath of that, we prepared a number of reports, both internally and commissioned external reports. And a key turning point came in 2015 with the delivery of our at the time most recent Energy Master Plan. And the key distinction between that one and prior Energy Master Plans was that microgrids were baked into it, that said, yes, we need to go forward with these microgrids. So in 2017, we established what we call a Town Center Distributed Energy Resource, or TCDER, microgrid program. We solicited applications statewide, and these were for feasibility studies. So what we came back with was with 13 applications from cities, municipalities, counties, and county utility authorities for the feasibility studies. So we funded all of them to the tune of $2.2 million. So we have these studies in-house. We've accepted all of them, and what we're doing now is preparing an application for a detailed design phase. We have $4 million in the budget, and the solicitation will look something like this, where, well, we now have 12 participants. One had dropped out. And we're weaving in some additional new factors, such as greening up the microgrids. We want to see a reduction in greenhouse gases over business as usual. We want to see integration of energy storage. Full disclosure, I own the energy storage goal, so I am kind of pushing that a little bit. And also cost sharing, whereby we don't want to fund the entirety of these designs. We want the applicants to also cost share with that. The design applications will be competitive since we have a pool of 12 prospective applicants and only $4 million. We announced that we intend on selecting at least one applicant from each of the 3 participating electric delivery company service territories. So of course, the EDCs are critical in helping us achieve success. So we want to keep all of them at the table. And we've specified that one basis of design will be, only one basis of design will be accepted, because we noticed in the feasibility studies there was a lot of options and future plans, and it's hard to competitively score a moving target, so we wanted one basis of design to select. And as of now, we don't have construction funding. This is only for detailed design. So some of the specs we baked in are clean and green with maximizing renewable energy and energy storage, and DURCAM comes into play into that. So I hope to engage Dan Ton and his group further on that. We're interested in increasing the use of electrical vehicle charging in the microgrids, and reduction in peak demand. From a social perspective, we're interested in Class 4 and Class 3 FEMA, or I should say Category 3 and 4 FEMA critical facilities like police stations, fire stations, hospitals, and the like. So we will look favorably on microgrids that bake in those types of facilities. Also, public sheltering. A couple of folks have mentioned that before. We look at that as critical as well. So to the extent that the microgrid can help to supply power to public shelters, we look favorably on that. And also replicability, in that we want to use these initial tranche of 12 projects to serve as prototypes for those to come after that. We want microgrids to be large and common, so replicability is important to us. On the financial side, one of the criteria we'll look at is the use of microgrids to avoid T&D expenditures by the electric delivery company. We'll be looking for our applicants to submit, in conjunction with their EDC's tariff proposals, discussion of ratepayer impacts, and also who benefits and who pays for the microgrid. And one of the things that have come up is, yes, the people that live within the core of the microgrid benefit, but do those that live beyond the core of the microgrid also benefit? And if the question is those who benefit should pay, I mean, how do you address that in the context of a tariff? And the things that have come up here today, the viability, the business model, and the financing is a key element of that as well. Insofar as technology is concerned, there's a bit of a paradox where we're on one hand looking for innovation, but on the other hand, we also have to stay confined within the existing, what we call the box, the existing regulatory and statutory construction that constrains our development of microgrids as it stands right now. The degree of resilience is critical. while we're not mandating undergrounding or anything like that, we'll look at kind of look at it from a failure mode and effects analysis to see who can keep the lights on during and after the storm. And we'll be looking at the overall effect on the microgrids on the distribution system. Hopefully it's favorable with helping avoiding T&D costs and smoothing out the the ups and downs on the distribution system. So we have an application in house, and we're just about to put that on the street, and we're quite excited about that. Switching gears, there's another aspect to our microgrid program, and that is we call that financing advanced microgrids. In 2018, we received a grant from the U.S. Department of Energy, thank you, Dan, to the tune of $300,000 to help do this financing. And to that end, we've hired the New Jersey Institute of Technology and Rutgers University to assist us in developing that. So we're off to the races with that. We've held a number of two stakeholder meetings with the municipalities, their consultants, the electric utilities, NARUC-NASEO, and DOE have also been involved in all that. So they're in the process of benchmarking the programs around the country in respect to how they're financed and procured. So that remains ongoing. With respect to financing option, there's a couple of dozen different options, such as grants, using our own budget, using FEMA hazard mitigation funds, HUD resilience funds, funding through energy efficiency savings, loans and loan guarantees, the establishment of a bank such as the Connecticut Green Bank. New Jersey does operate an energy resilience bank that I'm also involved in, but that's exclusively using HUD money, and to date it hasn't used any state funds. Also, we're looking at FEMA funding, debt-based models, green bonds, tax credits, private financing, equity, debt, energy as a service model, power purchase agreements, and hybrids of all the above. And I won't list all those permutations through that. And the pro forma calculations that each of these ideas would be subject to will be one of the real keys in identifying which one we go forward with. Let's see. Also, you might have heard the acronym DBOOM. That's one of the things we're looking at. It's who will design, build, own, operate, and maintain the microgrids. And the key constraint facing our program is that of the one right-of-way limitation on privately owned wires. And New Jersey our intent is, while some of these statutory issues are state-specific, we're looking to work with our partners around the country, and that our learnings are useful for others as well. And some of the questions come up, the value of resiliency and the value of decarbonizing and the like. And a threshold question: should a microgrid save ratepayers money in order to be permitted to go forward? To what extent should utilities be involved in a microgrid is one of the questions that we're all asking ourselves. Is it appropriate to use rate basing as an element in financing these microgrids? That's clearly on the table as well. Should new microgrid-specific tariffs be established? That's another question that we're exploring. And all this, we'll continue to have stakeholder meetings, and all this will be baked into deliverables report in mid-2021. So that's all I have.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of us, because this was really interesting. I have a lot of questions, but I want to invite you all to have questions or ask questions as well. So see if anybody on the phone has questions. Please also raise your hand. We're monitoring the webinar. Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you to everyone, to our panelists, some good discussion here. I'm just curious for all of you, particularly the states, if you faced any particular challenges, especially from a regulatory framework, as you started your proceeding or started the project or the study, or do you foresee any challenges coming up that you're still grappling with in your states?
That wasn't nice. But because the Brownsville project is a study, it certainly was a contested docket, but it's a 10-year study, and I think that I don't know how much. Can you repeat your question? Not so much. Not quite yet. I think that certainly cost is a concern that was raised in the proceeding. Again, we're awaiting the initial cost-benefit analysis report that'll be due this year. But I think generally all stakeholders felt that the proceeding was necessary, realizing the importance of microgrids and the stability of the grid and what have you.
And from California, what I would throw into the mix is, as Dr. Kimball said from Illinois, cost. Because remember, everyone remembers, of course, when the utility is selling less electricity because folks have gone off the grid, who picks up the cost for the fixed costs, for the capital investments and poles, lines, wires, and so forth. And so how do we provide for equity, fairness, and then whatever in the case of our statute, as far as not shifting costs, how do we accomplish that? So that will be in one of our phases. And then also the interconnection into the grid, because even as you look to go off the grid, there's still an interconnection attribute to it, and there are folks who've been waiting for a while to have that happen with the investor-owned utilities, and then of course the resources of the investor-owned utilities to process applications. So those sorts of logistics are, infused into our proceeding. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Mike from New Jersey. So we're kind of have a two-track process where we're working right now within what we call the box, that is the regulatory and statutory conditions that have been around for a century. And as we go forward, we'll have to take a closer look at how we might address those statutory and regulatory constraints. So 2 tracks for us is our solution.
Thank you. We do have a question from the participants online. This is a question for Illinois. Can Illinois elaborate on their process in establishing a microgrid tariff?
I don't know if we've gotten there yet. I don't think we have. I think we're still waiting on the learnings coming out of this project, and I'm going to have to leave it at that. But we could circle back if I'm wrong. But I think that's where we are.
Sounds good. Other questions? Yes, please.
I have a question for Commissioner Kimbrell for Illinois. As I understand it, part of the Bronzeville project, because you have a prohibition on the utility, who is a distribution utility, also owning generation, and as you mentioned, that they will go out for competitive bid for the generation that will feed into the microgrid. And that's really a very novel idea, how we're going to deal with generation within the microgrid. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate at all on anything that's been going on in that competitive process. Are they getting the bids? Are they getting the kinds of bids that they wanted? Are there problems with, what that relationship is going to be and the ability of the generation to sell either within the microgrid or outside of the microgrid? Any of those types of transactional types of issues, have those crossed your plate yet?
Thanks for the question. Thanks for all of your questions. But that certainly hasn't come up in the reports that have been filed within the docket yet. As I said, the company is filing annual reports, but regarding the procurement process, to the extent that I can tell from what I've read in those reports, it seems like it's going rather smoothly, but there's not a lot there, honestly. And no stakeholders. This is a closed docket. We do have reports that are coming in, of course, but no one has filed anything in the docket to suggest otherwise. So I'm not really certain. That's a great question.
Tom.
Thank you, Tom Stanton with NRRI. For California, a question you mentioned, I think, David, you mentioned both AC and DC couplings. Can you elaborate at least a little bit on the circumstances? And it's hard, I think, for most of us to imagine a DC microgrid interconnecting with an AC grid.
So in those cases, so we actually have several instances, different applications. So in some applications, the solar and storage were connected directly, DC coupled, and then connected through the inverter to the grid. So we had several of those applications. We also had one facility where the recipient actually converted the entire facility to DC. So they put in DC lighting, DC fans. It was a large warehouse, DC forklift chargers, and the entire thing was designed so that they could run off of the solar and the storage without the inverter. Unfortunately, that recipient, which was a large international company, decided to get out of the microgrid business. So they actually had to revert the entire facility back to AC at the end of the project. But it was a pretty substantial savings for that facility. I think it was saving them almost 60% a year on their energy by having that system in place. And so it was a real disappointment for them to have to revert back.
Thank you. And if I may ask a question for New Jersey. For one thing, thank you so much for making all those financial reports available from the universities. Boy, does that sound like it'll be helpful. Really looking forward to that. And then you mentioned this idea of the law allowing only one crossing of a right-of-way. Does that mean it could be legal for two separate utility customers to interconnect across a right-of-way, or does it have to be one customer with only one crossing of the right-of-way?
Let me make sure I understand your questions. So you're posing a scenario where two customers would interconnect themselves across a right-of-way? Or I guess we would look at it as two distributed energy resources. If you want to look at each of those as a customer, that still gives you one card to play. There is an exemption to that, though. If you're also running thermal energy, you could cross as many rights of ways as you want, but that's much harder to do. There's not always a condition where thermal off-takers are available, so that leaves us with the one right-of-way constraint as it applies to privately owned wires, not utility-owned wires.
Thank you.
I was going to mention one of our projects did get approval from the Public Utility Commission to have that transfer occur. So it's the Port of Long Beach microgrid, where they're obviously one customer, and their piloting service is a separate customer. And so they made a request through their utility, who made a request to the PUC to allow, when the microgrid is energized and islanded, that they can provide support to the piloting service, because obviously during an emergency, the port needs the piloting services, and so having them go dead was no value. And so the Public Utility Commission made that allowance.
Megan.
All right, thank you, and thanks for a great panel. This has been really, really interesting. My question's for David. You had a digester as one of your microgrids, and that's something we're really interested in Wisconsin. It's just like sort of the idea of the resilient agricultural facility. Can you tell us a little bit about, are you using renewable natural gas in that, or how's that set up?
So that's one of the ones that's currently in development. A large company is developing that with the help of both, multiple sources. So Energy Commission, our Cal Recycle, both received grants, and Department of Energy, I believe, might be giving them a grant as well. But this facility is intended to take diverted food waste. I think it's going to take, remember, it's a large number, like 80 or 90% of the commercial food waste from LA, and process that, produce renewable natural gas, which can be re-injected back into the SoCal gas system. Also can be used for vehicles, but they're making a microgrid and adding storage to that to ensure that facility could operate with a consistent supply of food waste. They could continue operating indefinitely. So that system will probably go online, I believe, late this summer is when it'll be fully operational. And we can get you more information about that and connect you with the recipient if you're interested.
And we have a question in the back.
Yes, in Rhode Island, you mentioned about resilience, and I was wondering how you define that, and if others have been putting in something like resilience, how is that defined in your system?
That's a great question that I should have come prepared with. It is in the report, the microgrid report, and I just don't remember the exact definition that's in there. I do know that also EC4 has defined resiliency as well, that organization that I mentioned that has 14 governmental agencies in Rhode Island, and so both of those entities, it's publicly available. The definition is on that climate change website that I mentioned and on the report. I just don't know what it is.
So this question is for California primarily. I heard your comment about the grid defection and what that means in terms of ratepayer impact. Have you guys thought through, from a utility perspective, if the utility is going to be required to maintain or to build new capacity for the load inside the microgrid in case the microgrid fails to operate? So are the utilities having to maintain enough engineering capacity to take on the load of the microgrid at any point in time, or are they allowed to reduce their investment in the system around the microgrid so that they don't have to absorb that load?
So these questions are folded into our proceeding. At this point, here's how I put it. At this point, we've learned a lot from the EPIC projects and other projects. But resiliency and reliability and safety are tantamount. So at this point, we're not going to reduce requirements for the utilities. Even as we are working expeditiously before the next wildfire season, it is still a phased-in approach. And we need to be assured that microgrids are reliable. And there are various facets to a microgrid. Is it something that is intermittently used, or is it something that is used 24/7? Okay? And by the way, we have a project, it's called Stone. Let's see, what is it? It's called Stone Farms.
Stone Edge Farms.
Stone Edge Farms. Thank you. That's it. That's the one. And this is where the owner has funded his microgrid on his own. And it is a small winery, wine grape growing operation in Sonoma County. And he, by the way, he is saying that whatever he has learned from his microgrid experience is open source. And what he has on his 16 acres is he's got Tesla batteries, he's got hydrogen fuel cells, he's got an electrolyzer generating the hydrogen, he's got solar. He also happens to have a small natural gas-fired power generator that he is trying not to use at all. Okay? And he's been off the grid for over 45 days. And it's interesting to see what he's done with an acknowledged deep pocket. At least from that experience, we can learn from his experience as to how to put something like that together for himself. Thank you.
On this question of what is the definition of resilience, our microgrid program doesn't have a definition of resilience, but the State Energy Resilience Bank does happen to have one. And namely, that flows out, it's a requirement of hospitals to keep the lights on for 7 days, to maintain operation for 7 days. And that requirement came from the Federal Department of Health, or the entity that regulates hospitals. So, and let's say if it comes, well, what about natural gas? If they're firing their boilers with natural gas, so they're required to have a non-curtailable natural gas supply for at least 7 days. But most of them have, you know, tens of thousands of gallons of on-site oil too to help maintain resilience. So between the natural gas and the oil and any additional resilience measures that might be imparted by, say, solar and storage, that gives them their resilience capability.
And David McGowan for the Army again. We have definitions now enacted in law, and an interesting part to follow up on your comment there is a bit that we haven't looked at enough in our organization. Many others look in it. Is first of all, you need to anticipate, adapt to things changing, and for us, the threat matrix is changing monthly that we're looking at. But then there's the withstand piece, which is what we all tend to think about when, in our case, the hurricane's coming through. But the bit I'd focus on is the recover rapidly afterwards. Assume it's going to go wrong. Then how do you get all the resources in place, and getting our civilians onto a military base afterwards when the traffic lights isn't working really does mean it's a community issue. And an enormous issue we have right now that very few believers, any of you that are building plans in which you think the backup generators is going to be sufficient, are wrong. It's not going to last beyond a couple of 3 days. And now being a Hurricane Sandy survivor, I can attest my value, which is the point I was originally coming up to here, on the value of electricity is currently $2,500 a kilowatt hour. Because day 10, my generator arrived. It cost me $5,500 to install it. And since we got the power back on from PSEG, I've operated it monthly for maybe about 2 or 3 kilowatt hours since then. But it's how much are we prepared to put a value on it. And commissioners, going back to Lynn Good and that 28-year-old with her iPad blockchain-enabled thing, my question is, are we looking at it completely wrong? The meter pan, if we show that 28-year-old female, they would probably think we just pull it out of an Edison archive. That with this digital age, when we are charging on a price per kilowatt hour, I've seen the impact very directly with the poor in the Virgin Islands, it's just the wrong thing. Our colleagues over in the telecommunication side of the house have long ago accepted that we don't charge for how many bits we actually push through our internet connection. It's the same cable connected to the wall and the same in the house. I have no clue how many bytes I consume a month in the analogy to kilowatt hours, but I can tell you we sure as heck know when I'm not getting 25 megabits per second. So I'm wondering if there's a similar analogy we should be looking at, especially if you think in California, just to be connected to the grid. We had enormous negativity around this in the Virgin Islands when we have housekeepers in hotels paying for the multi-million pair down the street who's getting retail net metering on solar. She's paying for that solar, but they weren't necessarily paying that grid connection fee that you talked about there, Commissioner. Sorry I went on a little bit longer, but something I have passion for.
Yeah, no, this is something that we are grappling with, what have you. I mean, because we, in adopting rates for the investor-owned utilities, and it's not only PG&E, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric. We also have some medium-sized companies, Pacific Core, Liberty, Bear Valley. It is about providing fairness and equity, because there very much is this notion that you've outlined that the folks who can't afford this are subsidizing those who can. And so that, keenly aware of it, something that our staff is going to be looking at, because actually the current statute says we're not supposed to be allowing cost shifts. So we have to figure out, okay, how do we accomplish that? and that will be, we will need to figure that out. Thanks.
If I could jump in and circle back to you, you asked me about the competitive procurement process happening within the Brownsville microgrid, and I'm looking at the report filed last year in February of 2019. I should note that the company is providing stakeholder workshops prior to issuing their RFPs. For what I haven't had access to that information. I haven't requested it, but that's occurring. I just wanted to note that for you.
And could I tag on to that? Well, David, you first.
Oh, I was just going to say, on the subject of providing value to what we in California call disadvantaged communities or low-income communities, we do have multiple projects that are looking at how you can structure microgrids to support those communities, to provide value back to them, reduction in rates, benefits of resiliency. So we do have specific projects that we focus on those communities specifically to look at how we can provide value and demonstrate the value to those communities. So I think that is an important part of our program.
Yes, and so in the mix in our evaluation, we also have the storage incentive, the self-generation incentive program. Yep. And we just voted out a decision that will be it's a $600 million program, $100 million in the first year, and it is for it's very specific. It's for low-income, disadvantaged communities that have experienced two or more of the de-energizations and are in our higher fire zone areas. And there's extensive areas of California that are in these high fire zones. And what this program does is to provide for free to the home, to the customer, free storage and and installation and what have you. That program just got voted out about a month ago or so, a couple months ago, and so it's just launched. It is an effort to look at that equity and to give the low-income and disadvantaged communities, and also medical customers. The folks on the medical rate are also qualified for this storage option. It's to provide for equity, but in the meantime, in doing that, we still are going to need to look in our microgrid proceeding as to how that is accomplished, because that is a very specific zone that is going to receive this storage subsidy. And then also, I'm reminded by Commissioner Kimball that we have in our microgrid proceeding, the investor-owned utilities were required to submit proposals for their specific utilities. So we have a multi-pronged effort on garnering the best applications and the best information for our decision. Thanks.
And that's, yep, we have one more question over here.
I heard the nature of the projects, a lot of them resilience oriented, but at the same time, are you building in any into these projects any ways to evaluate what the projects might bring in terms of cost savings, production efficiencies to the grid or market opportunities that could take advantage of the benefits generated by these projects? Is it just resilience oriented, or are you looking at other value streams, and then how the grid, the market could take advantage of that to bring down costs, show the cost effectiveness of the benefits of these microgrid projects?
So I definitely say yes, we are doing that quite a bit. So in the previous group of projects, which were initiated back in 2015, we recognize that those, mostly through peak shaving, resulted in the facilities reducing their electricity costs substantially, upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars per year in some cases. And so what we did is we looked at that as well as the reduction in cost of solar and storage, and that's where we came with the conclusion that we think we're at the point of commercialization and looking at those replicability options, because we think the cost savings can be in the right order of magnitude for these to be implemented without funding from the state. And so that was the purpose of this most recent round, is actually to demonstrate that you can, with the current cost of solar and storage and the benefits of the energy savings, that you can create something that is going to have the kind of payback for most customers, and that can be a substantial driver for it, aside from the resiliency. I mean, a lot of these entities want resiliency anyway, but we don't currently have a good way of accounting for it. We have a couple of efforts in the state right now to try to come up with some way to quantify resiliency. But without that quantification, we're looking at other measures, and this is one measure. So yes, we look at that very closely.
If I could just add to that, if you look at all the individual components in a microgrid, it's the solar that's cheap and it's the storage that's expensive. So in effect, you can use the solar to subsidize the other elements within the grid.
Just want to share a story from the islands. So Larry Ellison of Oracle owns 98% of an island called Lanai off the coast of Maui. And so the island is home to about 7,000 people, and has one big giant, not giant, but has one diesel generator. They've had a series of outages that have caused problems to the resorts there. One day, one storm in particular took out the system for 3 days, and which is hurting Larry Ellison's businesses there with the resorts. So at the end of last year, he came to us and said, or his representatives came to us and said that they're going to build a microgrid and take 40% of the load off of Lanai. That means that the remaining load would be borne by the 7,000 inhabitants or residents that live on the island. And we did a quick back of the envelope estimate and found that their bills would go up approximately $55 a month. So that was not an insignificant amount. So our response, we asked him if he'd be willing to take over the entire electric grid on the island of Lanai. And he said he'd think about it. He came back and said that he'll work with MECO, which is Maui Electric Company, to come up with a proposal to take over the island. But our response was, could you take over the island and then not microgrid? But he was dead set on microgridding because he wants to go to renewables for the resorts in particular. That's a selling point for him. But it was just a really interesting scenario where we had to think about what the impact of those microgrids would actually be to the rest of the residents that live there. And it was pretty dramatic what those costs were going to be. So and he was going to rebuild the entire distribution system that served so he wouldn't actually use any of MECO's infrastructure. He was going to rebuild that entire distribution system that served that load at the resorts.
As an academic, I spend a lot of time thinking about sort of rabbit holes. So if you'll indulge me for another minute, for many of you, one of the things that has concerned me as I hear more and more about funding, particularly public funding, going towards critical infrastructure. How do we know, or what are the assurances that 5 years, 10 years down the road, that investment is going to be there? Or do you feel that it's something to be pulled back? I mean, we've all eaten in a restaurant that used to be a firehouse. So we put this microgrid in for the city center or whatever. It involves the firehouse and maybe a school that will be a shelter. And 10 years from now, the firehouse has got a brand new facility 20 miles away. The school is condos. The infrastructure might still be there. And if it was publicly funded, that sort of ups the concern about how did we invest this, what obligations were there to use that infrastructure to meet this resiliency need? Are there commitments? Are there other obligations that people undertake when they get this kind of funding to, meet this resiliency need in terms of time?
What I've noticed in New Jersey is in instances like smart meters, replacing our old meters, the ratepayer advocate would say, well, the existing meters aren't fully depreciated. So that applies to meters and also streetlights. A lot of people are interested in transitioning streetlights to LEDs, but the existing lights aren't fully depreciated. So the ratepayer advocates in our states have a say in that too, to watch the purse.
And I think that's something we can think about and figure out in terms of how have we done things in like type situations as we have approved the general rate cases for the utilities and the infrastructure that goes along with it. So I think our staff is listening on the webinar, and we'll have to think on that as far as how or if we should factor such a thing in. Thank you for bringing it up.
And one last question in the back.
Me and technology always having problems. So a question related to technology, I guess. I'm hearing a lot, obviously, the word resilience keeps coming back and the cost of microgrids, but particularly in Rhode Island, California, I hear also that need to keep the microgrid green or climate friendly in a sense. Can we achieve all three of those things, having cost-effective fish microgrids and have them be resilient to the degree that, New Jersey was talking about 7 days of power with a green microgrid? Are we there yet, or do we need to do something more? Is technology ready? I guess that's the question, or a cost-effective way.
So I would say we're not there completely yet. Within the state of California, our program, we cannot fund fossil fuel, so we don't fund any kind of diesel backup generation, although the reality is most of these facilities on their own put some diesel backup. We've seen islanding for the fire stations as an example for up to 10 to 12 hours. That's not enough for them under a large PSPS event. I think we're moving in the right direction. We're not quite there yet. I think we can continue and we should continue to green and make sure that we're putting in solar and storage as much as possible and try to reduce the amount of fossil fuel that we're applying. I think that makes sense. Going back to the fire stations, the fire chief basically said, he's required, I think, to have 3 days worth of diesel supply. And when that runs out, he's on the market fighting for everybody else for diesel. So any solar and storage that can be deployed extends their diesel that much further and makes them get through the outage much better. And so they're already seeing the value of not just having a fossil backup, but having green backup as a critical element. And in that transition, as we get better solar, better storage, we'll be able to extend that. But there's already value in doing it, so we should continue to do it.
If I may add one thing to what David just said, I agree with everything he said, and I would add another nugget that I stole from California, and that is namely in one of the California microgrid programs, they put limits on the emissions from existing diesels before they're allowed to tie into a microgrid. So I see that as helpful as well.
In Illinois, we had a June 28, 2018 staff report. The commission had actually directed ComEd to work with our staff on proposals to integrate higher levels of renewable DERs and lower carbon emitting alternatives to diesel in the project. The results were pretty interesting. Again, that docket is 170331, and you can find that on our commission website.
Any final comment, Commissioner? Okay, so let's see what else to add on for California. One portion of the SGIP program, the storage program, does require, in order to qualify for the funding, that the fuel used to recharge the battery is renewable. And I don't have any data to provide at this point on that, but I want to refer everyone to our cpuc.ca.gov website, which we are trying to make easier to use, but there's a lot of information on that website, including our docket information. Again, as David said from the Energy Commission, we're not there yet. This Stone Edge Farm with, Mac McQuan, his team acknowledges it's very expensive to do what they're doing, but there are consultants who are working on learning from what he has done and looking to see what can be garnered to provide for that business case so it does pencil out for investment in microgrids. So we are looking forward to getting more of that information.
Thanks so much. With that, we're wrapping up the panel. Please join me in thanking our excellent panelists, and I hope you all got very good ideas from other states to steal, as New Jersey did, from California. So steal away those good ideas. So thank you so much for this excellent panel. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Kira to give us instructions before we all break for the break.
Yes, so thank you again to the panelists. We're going to take a break now until 3:45 for about 15 minutes. Then when we come back, we will be splitting into our 3 breakout discussion groups. So again, the topics are up on the screen: utility role in microgrid development, maintenance, and cost recovery. That will be led by Susan. That group will be at the table to my right. Microgrid ownership structures, business cases, and financing options. That will be led by Donna. At the table to my left, and then the quantifying resilience and economic benefits of microgrids, that will be led by me, and I will be at the table in the back. So unfortunately, to those on the phone, I'm afraid we don't have the capability to continue the webinar while we're in the breakout groups. So I think we're going to end the webinar for the day, but I would encourage you to join us again tomorrow morning for the presentations from our federal partners. So we'll break until 3:45 and then come back, and please sort yourself into whichever discussion group you would like. Thanks.